Welcome back. I've got a special story to share today.
Is that a knockoff? Beatrice sneered, fingering Maya's collar in front of the gathered board members. The silk felt thin under the weight of her sister's scrutiny, a stark contrast to the heavy, cloying scent of jasmine perfume that followed Beatrice like a predator's musk. The gala was meant to honor their father's legacy, but in the 3 months since Thomas Thorne's heart had failed him, Beatrice had turned every memorial into a stage for her own coronation. Maya Thorne didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, her spine a rod of tempered steel even as the whispers began to ripple through the ballroom. The elite of the city leaned in, their eyes glittering with the predatory hunger of the board. They weren't here for the charity, they were here for the blood. "It was a gift from Father," Maya said, her voice a calm, low vibration that barely reached the ears of those standing closest. Beatrice laughed, a sharp, melodic sound that lacked any warmth. She turned to the crowd, her diamonds catching the light of the crystal chandeliers and casting jagged shadows across her face. A gift, darling, Father had taste. He wouldn't have been caught dead in a bargain bin polyester blend. But then again, he always did have a soft spot for charity cases, didn't he? A few of the board members chuckled. Elias Vance, standing by the mahogany bar, didn't join them. His eyes remained fixed on Maya, his expression unreadable, though his knuckles were white where he gripped his glass. He was the only one who had been in the room when the old man died, a secret he carried like a heavy stone. Beatrice stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space until the heat of her arrogance was palpable. "I've been meaning to talk to you about your living arrangements, Maya. Now that the estate is being restructured under my sole direction, we need to clear out the unnecessary overhead. Thorne Manor is a place for the family that actually contributes to the name." She signaled to a waiter, who approached with a silver tray. Instead of a drink, Beatrice reached for a thick, cream-colored envelope. She held it out between 2 manicured fingers, her expression one of faux pity. "What is this?" Maya asked, though she already knew. The weight of the moment felt like the air before a lightning strike, thick, charged, and suffocating. "An eviction notice," Beatrice whispered, her voice dripping with a cruel, honeyed satisfaction. "You have 48 hours to vacate the guest wing. I've already instructed Mrs. Gable to oversee the packing. I told her not to worry about the trash, she can just leave it on the curb." The room went silent. The sound of a champagne flute shattering against the marble floor echoed from the far side of the room, a sharp punctuation to the humiliation. Maya looked down at the envelope. Her fingers brushed the heavy paper, and for a fleeting second, she felt the familiar sting of the charity case label Beatrice had spent years branding her with. But then she felt the small, hard shape of the locket beneath her dress, the one Elias Vance had slipped into her hand during the funeral. Inside wasn't a photo, but a micro-SD card and a key to a vault Beatrice didn't even know existed. 48 hours, Maya repeated. She finally looked up, meeting her sister's gaze. For the first time that evening, she didn't look like the suppressed girl who had spent a lifetime in the shadows of the Thorne name. She looked like someone who was finally counting the cost of the debt she was about to collect. Beatrice smirked, misinterpreting the silence for defeat. "Don't make it difficult. It's embarrassing for everyone. Just take your little trinkets and go back to whatever hole you crawled out of before Father brought you home." She turned her back on Maya, dismissing her with the casual flick of a wrist. "Now, if everyone could direct their attention to the screen, I'd like to share the new vision for Thorne Industries." As the lights dimmed for the presentation, Maya felt a hand on her elbow. It was Elias. He leaned in, his voice a ghost of a sound over the hum of the projector. "The board meeting is in 3 days, Maya Thorne," Elias said. "She thinks she's already won because she has the keys to the front door. She's forgotten who holds the deeds to the foundation." "I haven't forgotten," she replied. Her pulse was steady now, a rhythmic drumbeat of impending justice. She felt the secret power of the information she held, the knowledge that Beatrice's restructuring was actually a desperate cover-up for a multi-million-dollar fraud. Maya turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking a sharp, deliberate rhythm on the marble. She didn't look back at the screen where Beatrice's face was now projected, 10 feet tall and glowing with unearned pride. Outside, the night air was cold, smelling of rain and wet stone. Maya stood on the grand steps of the manor, the eviction notice still clutched in her hand. She watched as a black sedan pulled up to the curb. Detective Sarah Chen sat in the driver's seat, her face illuminated by the glow of her dashboard. Maya didn't get in yet. She looked back at the glowing windows of the ballroom, at the silhouettes of the people who had just watched her be publicly discarded. Beatrice thought she was cleaning house. She didn't realize she was just making it easier for Maya to burn the whole thing down. 2 days, Maya whispered to the dark. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, dialing a number she had memorized weeks ago. When the voice on the other end answered, she didn't hesitate. "Julian, it's time. I need the full audit of the offshore accounts. Every cent Beatrice moved after the funeral." She hung up and stepped into the car. As the sedan pulled away from the Thorne estate, Maya watched the manor shrink in the rearview mirror. Beatrice Thorne had spent years making Maya feel like an outsider in her own home. But as the city lights began to blur past, Maya realized that being an outsider meant she was the only one who could see the cracks in the walls. And in 48 hours, she wasn't just going to vacate the house. She was going to take the entire Thorne empire with her. The next morning, the scent of burnt espresso and rain-slicked pavement filled the small corner cafe where Maya Thorne sat waiting. The grit of undissolved sugar crunched beneath her spoon as she stirred a lukewarm latte, her eyes fixed on the door. She had chosen this place specifically because it was the kind of establishment her stepmother would never set foot in, too loud, too cramped, and far too pedestrian. Julian Holloway slipped into the booth across from her, his damp trench coat smelling of ozone and the looming city storm. He didn't offer a greeting. Instead, he slid a matte black USB drive across the scarred wooden table. His fingers lingered on the plastic for a second, a silent warning in his sharp, tired eyes. "It's all there," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hiss of the industrial milk steamer. "The Bitter Roots, that's what your father called the primary shell company. Beatrice hasn't just been skimming off the top, Maya. She's been hollowing out the Thorne empire from the inside for 5 years. She's moved nearly 40% of the liquid assets into accounts that technically don't exist on any domestic ledger." Maya felt a cold, sharp spark of adrenaline. She tucked the drive into the inner lining of her purse, her fingers brushing the cool metal. This was her secret power, a digital blade sharpened by Beatrice's own greed. And the funeral expenses, the ones she claimed bankrupted the estate's immediate cash flow. Julian gave a grim, humorless smile. "She billed the estate twice for the same service and pocketed the difference. Your father's legacy isn't just being managed poorly, it's being cannibalized." 3 hours later, Maya stood in the plush, silent foyer of the Thorne family legal counsel. The squeak of her modest leather boots on the polished marble felt like a profanity in the temple of high finance. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose face was as structured and unforgiving as a legal brief, looked up from her mahogany desk. "You're early, Maya," the lawyer said, her tone professional but laced with the pity one might show a terminal patient. "The exit papers are ready for your signature. Beatrice was quite insistent that we conclude this today." "I'm sure she was," Maya replied, taking a seat. The heavy double doors behind her swung open with a violent grace. Beatrice Thorne marched into the room, the cloying, suffocating scent of lilies and expensive ash trailing behind her like a funeral shroud. She was draped in charcoal silk, her diamonds catching the overhead light with a predatory glint. "Still here," Beatrice sneered, not even looking at Maya as she handed her designer handbag to an invisible assistant. She turned to Mrs. Gable, her voice rising for the benefit of the 2 junior clerks standing by the filing cabinets. "I hope you've checked the silver in the foyer after she walked through. Some habits are hard to break, even for a charity case who's lived under my roof for a decade." The junior clerks exchanged uncomfortable glances. Maya didn't flinch. She watched the way Beatrice's pulse thrummed in her neck, the arrogance of a woman who believed she had already won. "I'm just here to settle the final accounts, Beatrice," Maya said calmly. Beatrice let out a sharp, jagged laugh that set Maya's teeth on edge. She stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space, the heat of her entitlement radiating off her like a fever. "Accounts? You have no accounts. You have the pity I've shown you and the suitcase you packed last night. Your father was a sentimental fool who left his business to a woman who knew how to run it, not a girl who spent her life hiding in the library." She reached into her purse, pulled out a handful of loose change, and tossed it onto the mahogany desk. The coins clattered and rolled, one of them falling to the floor and spinning at Maya's feet. "There," Beatrice snapped, her eyes wide with a manic, cruel delight. "Consider that your final inheritance. It's more than you're worth, and certainly more than that drunkard of a father ever earned in his final years. He died knowing you were a failure, Maya. Don't forget that as you're looking for a subsidized apartment." Mrs. Gable cleared her throat, clearly unsettled by the vitriol. "Beatrice, perhaps we should stick to the documents." "The documents say she's nothing," Beatrice hissed, leaning down until her face was inches from Maya's. "Sign the waiver. Relinquish your name, take your coins, and crawl back into the shadows where you belong." Maya looked down at the silver coin resting against the toe of her boot. She thought of the USB drive in her purse. She thought of the offshore ledgers, the double billing, and the systematic theft of her father's life's work. She reached down, picked up the coin, and placed it calmly on the desk. "I'll sign the papers," Maya said, her voice a low, steady hum that seemed to vibrate in the sudden silence of the room. "But I think you should know, Beatrice, I'm not just vacating the house." Beatrice smirked, adjusting her pearl necklace. "Oh, are you going to make a scene? Please, I've been bored all morning." "No scene," Maya said, standing up and meeting her stepmother's gaze with a terrifying clarity. "I'm just looking forward to the annual shareholders' gala on Friday. It's the 48th anniversary of the company's founding. It would be a shame if something unexpected happened to the Thorne legacy on such a historic night." Beatrice's smirk flickered, just for a fraction of a second. "You aren't invited, you little wretch." "I don't need an invitation to attend a house I still legally own a portion of," Maya whispered. She turned to Mrs. Gable, signed the final page with a steady hand, and walked toward the door. As she reached the exit, she paused, looking back over her shoulder at the woman who had spent years trying to break her. "Keep the change, Beatrice. You're going to need every cent of it by Monday morning." Maya stepped out into the rain, the countdown in her head ticking towards 0. 4 days. In 96 hours, the world would see exactly what kind of bitter roots Beatrice Thorne had planted, and Maya would be the one to pull them out of the earth. 2 days later, the rain had settled into a persistent, icy drizzle that blurred the skyline of the city into a smudge of charcoal and slate. Maya Thorne stepped into the dim, neon flicker of a basement office tucked behind a watch repair shop in the Diamond District. The heavy steel door hissed shut behind her, sealing out the damp hum of traffic and replacing it with the low-frequency thrum of high-powered cooling fans. Julian Halloway didn't look up from his monitors. He sat hunched in a high-backed ergonomic chair, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of 3 oversized screens. The air in the room tasted of ozone and stale espresso, a sharp contrast to the cloying floral scents Beatrice favored. "You're late," Julian said, his fingers dancing across a mechanical keyboard with a rhythmic, metallic clacking. "Traffic was a nightmare," she replied, moving to stand behind him. She watched as lines of green code cascaded down the center screen. "Do you have it?" He hit a final key with a flourish and leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. He gestured toward the monitors. "It took 36 hours of brute-forcing the encrypted subfolders in the Thorne Legacy Foundation's server. Beatrice Thorne thinks she's clever because she uses offshore proxies, but she's lazy. She used the same routing numbers for her personal charity, accounts that she used for the company's main payroll 5 years ago." Maya leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the spreadsheets that flickered into view. It was all there. Millions of dollars diverted from the foundation intended for underprivileged schools, redirected into a series of shell companies that eventually purchased a villa in Tuscany and a private jet lease. "This is more than just embezzlement," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "This is systematic fraud. It's a roadmap to a prison cell," Julian Halloway confirmed, sliding a small, matte black USB drive across the desk. "I've mapped every transaction. I even found the digital signatures she forged in your father's name 6 months after he was buried. She wasn't just stealing money, Faye. She was erasing his intentions." She picked up the drive, the cold metal feeling like a lead weight in her palm. This was the weapon. This was the truth that would dismantle the empire Beatrice had built on a foundation of lies. "Thank you, Julian. Be careful," he warned, finally looking her in the eye. "She's a cornered animal, even if she doesn't know it yet. People like her don't just lose, they burn everything down on their way out." "I'm counting on it," she said, her voice steady. By late afternoon, the drizzle had turned into a downpour. She returned to the Thorne estate one last time to collect the remaining items from her father's study. As she crossed the marble foyer, the sharp, rhythmic asterisk clink 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 asterisk of ice against crystal echoed from the drawing room. Beatrice stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, draped in a silk robe that cost more than a teacher's annual salary. She held a glass of scotch in one hand, her manicured nails tapping against the rim. The room smelled of expensive lilies and the bitter tang of peat. "I thought I told the staff to change the locks," Beatrice said without turning around. Her voice was thin and sharp, like a razor blade hidden in velvet. "I still have the legal right to my personal belongings until the end of the week," she replied, keeping her distance. Beatrice turned then, a slow, predatory movement. Her eyes were rimmed with a cold, calculated disdain. "You really are a glutton for punishment, aren't you? Creeping around this house like a beggar looking for scraps. It's pathetic, Maya. Your father would be absolutely mortified to see you like this, clinging to a name you no longer have the right to carry." Maya didn't flinch. She felt the USB drive in her pocket, a secret heat against her thigh. "My father knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly who you were, too. That's why he left the fail-safes he did." Beatrice laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that didn't reach her eyes. She took a slow sip of her drink, her gaze raking over Maya's modest trench coat and damp hair. "Fail-safes? Is that what you're calling your delusions now? You're a charity case, dear. A smudge on the Thorne legacy that I am finally scrubbing away. When I stand on that stage Friday night, I won't just be celebrating the company. I'll be celebrating the fact that you are finally, officially, nothing." She walked closer, invading Maya's personal space. The scent of her perfume was suffocating. "Don't bother showing up at the gala. I've already briefed security. If you even step onto the property, you'll be escorted off in handcuffs. It would be such a shame for the rightful heir to spend the night in a holding cell with the rest of the commoners." Maya met her gaze, her expression unreadable. She waited until the silence in the room became heavy, until Beatrice's smug smile began to flicker with the slightest hint of uncertainty. "You've always been so focused on the gates, Beatrice," she said softly. "You forgot to check what was already inside the house." She turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving the woman standing alone in the center of her cold, gilded cage. She found Elias Vance in the library, the old man sitting in a leather wingback chair, surrounded by the scent of aged paper and wood smoke. He looked up as she entered, his eyes weary but sharp. "I have the records, Elias," she said, sitting across from him. "Julian found the forgeries, everything from the month after the funeral." Elias closed his book, his hands trembling slightly. "I knew it. I knew he wouldn't have left her that much control. He trusted me with the original drafts, Maya. I've kept them hidden for 5 years, waiting for someone with the strength to use them." He reached into the side of the bookshelf, pressing a hidden catch. A small compartment popped open, revealing a yellowed envelope sealed with wax. "This is the true will, the one he signed 48 hours before the accident. The one Beatrice thought she had destroyed." Maya took the envelope, her fingers tracing the familiar script of her father's handwriting. The evidence was complete. The technical proof from Julian and the legal proof from Elias. 2 days, she whispered, looking at the clock on the mantel. "The gala starts at 8 on Friday," Elias said, his voice grave. "Are you ready for what happens when the lights go out?" Maya stood, the weight of the drive and the envelope feeling like a shield. She looked out the window at the storm-lashed grounds of the estate she had once called home. "I've been ready for 5 years," she said. "Beatrice wants a celebration of the Thorne legacy. I'm going to make sure she gets exactly what she deserves." She stepped out into the hallway, her heels clicking firmly against the marble. She didn't look back at the drawing room. She didn't need to. The countdown had reached the 48-hour mark, and for the first time in a long time, the shadow over the Thorne name felt like it was finally beginning to lift. As she reached the front door, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "The projector is patched into the main system. 1 click is all it takes." Maya tucked the phone away and stepped into the rain, a cold smile finally touching her lips. The debt of pride was about to be collected, and she intended to charge interest. The morning before the Thorne Legacy Gala, the air in the estate smelled of forced elegance and white lilies. Maya Thorne stood on the mezzanine, watching a team of florists arrange thousands of blooms. The scent was cloying, the kind of heavy fragrance used to mask something rotting underneath. Below, Beatrice Thorne barked orders at a catering manager, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Not those linens," Beatrice snapped, her hand trembling slightly as she pointed at a stack of ivory silk. "I told you only the thorn crest belongs on this table. Anything else is a commoner's rag." She turned, her eyes catching the gaze of the woman watching from above. A sneer curled her lip. "And you, why are you hovering like a vulture? If you're looking for a handout, the kitchen might have some scraps left after the guests are finished tomorrow." Maya didn't flinch. She felt the cool weight of the silver locket around her neck, the only thing her stepmother hadn't managed to steal yet. "I was just admiring the scale of it all, Beatrice. It's quite a production for a legacy built on such fragile foundations." Beatrice let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "Fragile? This family name is iron. It's a pity your father didn't have the spine to hold on to it. He was a weak man, Maya. That's why he's in the ground and I'm in the ballroom." The rage was a cold, steady hum in Maya's veins, but she kept her expression as smooth as the marble floor. She turned and walked toward the library, her heels clicking a rhythmic countdown against the stone. Inside, Julian Halloway was waiting, hidden behind a stack of leather-bound ledgers. He didn't look up from his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. "The patch is invisible," Julian whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "I've mapped the projector to trigger the moment the keynote file is opened. Beatrice thinks she's showing a tribute video to your father's generosity. Instead, the guests are going to see the offshore transfer logs and the forged signatures." Maya reached out, her fingertips brushing the cold glass of the tablet. The data was there, the digital executioner's blade. "Are you sure it can't be traced back to the server before the reveal?" "I've routed it through 3 encrypted nodes," Julian assured her. "By the time they realize the video isn't a montage of family photos, the entire board will have the PDF copies on their personal devices. 1 click. That's all it takes to burn the house down." "Good," she said, the word tasting like a promise. She left the library and ran into Aunt Patricia in the hallway. The older woman looked pale, her hands fluttering nervously at her throat. She looked as if she wanted to say something, but her eyes darted toward the ballroom where the shouting continued. "Maya, dear," Patricia whispered, stepping into the shadows of a heavy velvet curtain. "Beatrice she's on edge. Perhaps you should stay in the guest wing tomorrow for your own sake. She's planned a very specific announcement regarding the inheritance." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Maya replied, her voice soft but terrifyingly clear. "In fact, I think tomorrow will be the most honest day this family has had in 20 years. Patricia's eyes widened. She recognized the steel in the tone, a resonance that hadn't been there a week ago. "You're playing a dangerous game." "I'm not playing a game at all," Maya said. "I'm just finally settling the bill." As she moved toward the grand staircase, she saw Elias Vance standing by the front door, speaking quietly with a security guard. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a somber, knowing nod. He was the only one who knew the truth of what had happened the night her father died, and his presence was a silent anchor in the rising storm. At the bottom of the stairs, Beatrice Thorne was waiting, clutching a clipboard like a shield. She blocked the path, her perfume, a suffocating cloud of jasmine and entitlement, filling the air. "I want you to understand something," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Tomorrow night, I am officially merging the Thorne holdings into my private trust. Your name will be nothing but a footnote in a history book I'm about to set on fire. What could you possibly do to stop me? You have no money, no allies, and no standing." Maya leaned in, her gaze locked onto the manicured face. She noticed the slight twitch in the older woman's left eye, the tell of a cornered animal trying to look like a predator. "You're right," Maya said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "On paper, I have nothing, but you should remember one thing about foundations. When they're built on lies, it only takes one small fracture to make the whole ceiling come crashing down. I'd suggest you wear something sturdy tomorrow, Beatrice. It's going to be a very messy evening." The woman scoffed, rolling her eyes as she pushed past. "Dramatic to the end, just like your father. Go to bed, Maya. Try not to dream of things you'll never own." Maya watched her go, the sound of the sharp footsteps fading into the distance. She pulled her phone from her pocket and looked at the final message from Julian. System check complete. 24 hours to impact. The stage was set, the audience was invited, and the villain was already wearing her finest silk for the execution. Maya looked out at the darkening grounds, the shadows stretching long and black across the lawn. Tomorrow, the sun would rise on the Thorne legacy one last time. By the time it set, there would be nothing left but the truth. The evening of the Thorne Foundation's centennial gala arrived with a suffocating humidity that mirrored the tension in Maya's chest. The estate was transformed into a glittering trap of glass and gold, illuminated by thousands of fairy lights that dripped from the ancient oaks like weeping diamonds. Standing in the shadows of the foyer, Maya watched the arrival of the city's elite. She smoothed the skirt of her floor-length black silk gown, the fabric cool and heavy against her skin. It was a morning dress, masquerading as evening wear, a silent tribute to the man whose legacy was about to be burned to the ground to save its soul. Beatrice Thorne stood at the center of the grand ballroom, a vision in shimmering champagne lace that cost more than most families earned in a year. She held court beneath the massive crystal chandelier, her laughter ringing out like breaking glass. To the observers, she was the grieving widow turned philanthropic powerhouse. To Maya, she was a predator wearing her victim's skin. The scent of white lilies, thick, cloying, and smelling of funerals, filled the air, a deliberate choice by Beatrice to evoke sympathy for her late husband while she prepared to strip his name from the foundation. "Smile, dear," a voice whispered beside Maya. Aunt Patricia stood there, her hands trembling as she adjusted a pearl necklace that looked like a noose. Her eyes darted toward Beatrice, filled with a mixture of fear and reluctant admiration. "The cameras are everywhere. Don't let them see you looking like a ghost at your own party." "It isn't my party, Patricia," Maya replied, her voice low and steady. "It's a wake. Some people just haven't realized who died yet." She moved away before her aunt could respond, weaving through the crowd of tuxedoed men and perfumed women. Every clink of crystal against silver felt like a countdown. She spotted Elias Vance near the bar, looking uncomfortable in a stiff suit. He caught her eye and gave a single, somber nod. He was the anchor, the witness who had stayed silent for too long and was finally ready to speak. His presence was a quiet promise of justice, a stark contrast to the performative grief radiating from the woman on the dais. As Maya approached the main circle, Beatrice noticed her. The older woman's smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned into chips of ice. She reached out, her manicured fingers digging into Maya's forearm with surprising strength, pulling her into the conversation with a group of board members and a local senator. "There she is," Beatrice cooed, her voice dripping with a synthetic sweetness that made Maya's skin crawl. "My lovely Maya. She's been such a help with the transition, though I worry the stress is getting to her. She's always been fragile like her father." The senator offered a sympathetic look. A heavy burden for one so young. It's fortunate she has you to guide the thorn interests, Beatrice. I do what I must, Beatrice sighed, leaning closer to Maya so the scent of her tuberose perfume overwhelmed the lilies. Though I'm afraid the girl inherits her father's penchant for dramatic failure. He had such grand ideas, didn't he? All of them built on sand. I'm just here to provide the stone. Maya felt the rage spike in her blood, a hot, sharp pulse. She looked down at the hand on her arm, noting the massive diamond ring that had once belonged to her mother, a piece Beatrice had safeguarded after the funeral. My father didn't build on sand, Maya said, her voice carrying just enough to make the senator blink. He built on trust. It's a much harder foundation to maintain, especially when there are termites in the woodwork. Beatrice's grip tightened until Maya's pulse throbbed against her fingernails. Termites are easily exterminated, darling. Don't forget your place. You're a guest in this house by my grace alone. Now go find Julian. He's been looking for you to finalize the digital presentation. Try not to trip over your own hem on the way. She dismissed Maya with a flick of her wrist, turning back to the senator with a practiced pout. Maya didn't move immediately. She took a slow breath, letting the insult settle. It was fuel. She reached into the small clutch at her side, her fingers brushing the cool, metallic edge of the encrypted drive Julian Halloway had delivered an hour ago. She found Julian in the tech booth hidden behind a velvet curtain at the rear of the hall. He didn't look up from his monitors, his fingers flying across the keys. The blue light of the screens reflected in his glasses, making him look like a digital ghost. "Status?" Maya asked. "The system is wide open," Julian whispered, his voice crackling with a nervous energy. "I've bypassed the Foundation's firewall. The moment Beatrice starts her keynote, I'll have total control over the overhead projectors and the live stream. There's no kill switch they can reach in time. And the offshore accounts. Linked and ready for display. The ledger of her charitable transfers to the shell companies in the Caymans is formatted for 4K resolution. It's going to be the most expensive movie premiere in history." He finally looked up, his expression grim. "Once I hit enter, there's no going back, Maya. She'll lose everything, but the Thorn name will be dragged through the mud with her." "The name is already dirty," she replied. "I'm just washing it in public." She left the booth and returned to the floor. The lights began to dim, a signal that the main event was beginning. The crowd drifted toward the stage, a sea of wealth and ignorance. Maya took her position near the front, standing just off to the side of the podium. She could see Elias Vance moving toward the security station, ready to ensure the doors stayed closed until the truth was out. Beatrice ascended the stairs to the stage, the spotlight catching the gold threads in her dress until she seemed to glow. She looked like a queen ascending her throne. She tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the silent hall. "Friends, colleagues, and family," Beatrice began, her voice amplified and echoing. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate 100 years of the Thorn Foundation. We celebrate a new beginning, a future where we move past the sentimentalities of the past and embrace a more efficient vision." She paused for dramatic effect, her gaze sweeping over the audience until it landed on Maya. She offered a small, triumphant smirk, the look of a woman who believed she had already won. Maya didn't smile back. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and sent a 2-word message to Julian. "Begin impact." The screen behind Beatrice flickered. The celebratory montage of her father's face began to distort, the colors bleeding into a harsh, digital static. Beatrice paused, her brow furrowing as she glanced over her shoulder. "It seems we have a small technical glitch," she said, her laugh sounding a little tighter. "But as I was saying," the static cleared, but it wasn't the video of the new hospital wing that appeared. It was a scanned document, a bank transfer authorization dated 2 days after her father's death, bearing a signature that made the entire room go still. Maya felt the weight of the moment balance on a needle's point. The storm had arrived, and Beatrice Thorn was standing right in the center of the lightning rod. The silence in the ballroom was so heavy it felt physical, a suffocating pressure that drowned out the hum of the air conditioning. On the massive digital display, the bank authorization glowed with a cold blue light, illuminating the forged signature of a dead man. Beatrice Thorne stood frozen at the podium, her hand still raised in a half-finished gesture of triumph. The celebratory champagne in her glass trembled, the tiny bubbles the only thing moving in the room. "This is a mistake," she finally managed, her voice thin and cracking like dry parchment. She looked toward the tech booth, her eyes wide with a manic energy. "Maya, stop this childishness. It's a glitch. A tasteless, pathetic prank from a girl who has always been jealous of my position." Maya didn't move. She stood near the front row, the scent of the white lilies decorating the stage cloying and funeral sweet in her nostrils. She watched as Beatrice's mask began to disintegrate. It started at the eyes, which darted frantically from the screen to the faces of the board members. Her skin turned a ghastly, translucent shade of gray, the expensive foundation she'd applied so carefully now highlighting the frantic twitch in her left eyelid. Her mouth hung open, a jagged ruin of her usual rehearsed smile, while her breathing became a series of sharp, wet rattles. The poise she had cultivated for decades evaporated, leaving behind a woman who looked suddenly, violently small, her shoulders hunching as if trying to shield herself from the light of the truth. "It's not a prank, Beatrice," Maya said, her voice low but carrying to the back of the hall. "It's a forensic audit." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Aunt Patricia, sitting in the VIP section, clutched her pearl necklace so hard the string looked ready to snap, her face a mask of horrified realization. Beside her, a senior board member pulled out his glasses, leaning forward to squint at the routing numbers on the screen. He whispered something to the woman next to him, who immediately began typing on her phone, her gaze fixed on Beatrice with newfound predatory interest. Beatrice slammed her glass down on the mahogany podium. The crystal shattered, sending a spray of vintage champagne across her silk gown. "I built this empire. I protected our father's legacy while you were playing at being a martyr," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "Who are they going to believe? A grieving daughter who has steered this company through a crisis, or a charity case who couldn't even manage her own inheritance?" It was the ultimate rage spike, the same dismissal she had used for years to keep Maya in the shadows. But this time, it didn't land. The screen behind her flickered again. Julian had timed the sequence perfectly. The bank document vanished, replaced by a series of internal emails. They were dated months before the father's passing, detailing Beatrice's systematic siphoning of funds into offshore accounts. The subject lines were cold, calculated, and signed with her personal digital encryption. "You didn't protect his legacy," Maya said, stepping closer to the stage. The sound of her modest heels on the polished floor was like a gavel striking. "You picked the pockets of a dying man." Elias Vance stood up from the shadows of the wings, his presence lending a sudden, heavy gravity to the moment. He didn't say a word, but his steady, judging gaze was the final blow. He had been the witness Beatrice thought she'd bought with silence, and now he was the pillar Maya stood upon. Beatrice's knees buckled. She gripped the edges of the podium to keep from collapsing, her knuckles white and shaking. The society photographer at the edge of the room began snapping photos, the rapid-fire clicks sounding like a firing squad. The witnesses, once her loyal subjects, were now physically recoiling. The board members shifted their chairs away from the stage, creating a visible vacuum of power around the woman who had, moments ago, been their queen. "You said I didn't belong here," Maya said, her voice calm as ice. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single, embossed card, the direct contact for the district attorney's white-collar crime unit. "You were right. I don't belong in a room full of thieves. But as the majority shareholder of the Thorne estate, effective immediately, I'm the one who decides who stays." Beatrice opened her mouth to scream, to lie, to beg, but no sound came out. She looked like a ghost haunting her own party. Maya didn't wait for the security team she knew was waiting in the foyer, or for Detective Sarah Chen to make her entrance through the service doors. She turned her back on the wreckage of Beatrice's life and walked toward the exit. She didn't feel the need to gloat. The sound of the first sob breaking from the stage behind her was enough. She pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool night air. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a message from Julian. The accounts are frozen. She has nowhere left to run. Maya looked up at the city's skyline, the weight of years of silence finally lifting from her chest. The storm had passed, but the clearing of the air was only the beginning. She had reclaimed her name, but Beatrice still had to pay the interest on her debts. Less than an hour had passed since the heavy oak doors of the Thorne estate had slammed shut, but the air in the precinct's interrogation room felt decades removed from the scent of expensive lilies and vintage champagne. Here, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of scorched coffee and industrial-strength floor cleaner. Maya Thorne sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the cold metal surface of the table. Across from her, Beatrice Thorne looked like a tropical bird trapped in a concrete cage. Her designer silk gown was rumpled, and a stray lock of her perfectly coiffed hair hung over her eyes, twitching with every frantic breath she took. "This is an absurdity," Beatrice snapped, her voice cracking as she tried to summon her usual authority. She glared at Detective Sarah Chen, who was leaning against the far wall. "Do you have any idea who my lawyers are? By tomorrow morning I will have your badge for this little performance. I am a Thorne. I built this city's heritage." Maya didn't flinch. She watched her stepmother with a detachment that was more chilling than anger. "You didn't build it, Beatrice," she said, her voice a calm, steady blade. "You stole it, and heritage isn't something you can forge with a stolen pen and a frozen bank account." Beatrice's eyes snapped to her, burning with a familiar, entitled rage. "You're a charity case, Maya, a pathetic, ungrateful girl who should have been left in the dirt where your father died. You think a few digital records change who holds the power in this town. I own the banks, I own the board." "Not anymore." Julian Halloway stepped into the room, his boots echoing on the linoleum. He placed a tablet on the table and slid it toward the center. "The forensic audit is complete. The shell companies you used to drain the trust were registered in the Cayman Islands, but the IP addresses used to access them trace back to your private study. Every cent you moved tonight, thinking you were hiding it, went directly into a recovery escrow account." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, agonizingly slow ticking of the wall clock. Beatrice stared at the screen, her chest heaving. She looked toward Elias Vance, who stood near the door, his face a mask of weary disappointment. "Elias," she pleaded, her voice dropping the venom for a desperate, manipulative softness. "You know me. You know I did everything for the family. Tell them this is a mistake." Elias didn't move. "The only mistake I made, Beatrice, was keeping quiet for 20 years while you convinced the world that a good man died of his own negligence. I saw you move the documents that night. I saw you take his ring before his body was even cold." That was the moment the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Beatrice's features seemed to liquefy under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the overhead lights. The carefully applied porcelain foundation cracked in the deep furrows of her brow as her skin turned an ashen, sickly gray. Her eyes, usually sharp and predatory, darted frantically like a trapped animal's, the pupils dilating until the blue was swallowed by a terrifying, hollow blackness. Her lower lip began a rhythmic, uncontrollable tremor that she tried to bite back, but the regal composure of the Thorne matriarch was gone, leaving behind a hollowed-out version of a woman who had finally run out of lies to tell. Her shoulders slumped, the expensive silk of her dress suddenly looking like a shroud. Detective Chen straightened up, the sound of her handcuffs clicking as she pulled them from her belt. "Beatrice Thorne, you are under arrest for grand larceny, securities fraud, and the obstruction of justice regarding the investigation into your husband's death." The witnesses in the room, Julian, Elias, and a court clerk standing in the corner, all watched in a heavy, communal silence as the reality set in. The woman who had dictated the social hierarchy of the city for 2 decades was being forced to stand. "Wait," Beatrice wheezed, her voice a ghost of its former self. She looked at Maya, her eyes pleading for a mercy she had never shown. "Maya, please, think of the name. Think of what this will do to the Thorne legacy." Maya stood up, smoothing her skirt. She felt the weight of years of suppression finally evaporating, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. She leaned in, her face inches from the woman who had tried to erase her. "You spent 20 years trying to bury my father's name, Beatrice," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of a final judgment. "It's only fair you spend the next 20 living without it. From this moment on, you are a thorn in name only. And by the time the trial is over, you won't even have that." Maya turned her back before the first sob broke from Beatrice's throat, a jagged, ugly sound that had no place in the world of high society they had once shared. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic confidence on the hard floor. Julian met her in the hallway, his expression one of quiet triumph. "The press is already gathering outside. They've heard rumors about the gala. What do you want to tell them?" Maya paused at the exit, looking out through the glass at the flickering lights of the city. She could see the Thorne Plaza glowing in the distance, its name soon to be stripped and rebranded. She felt the cool metal of her father's signet ring in her pocket, the one Julian had recovered from Beatrice's private safe. "Tell them the truth," Maya said, her voice unfaltering. "Tell them the Thorne estate is under new management, and tell them the audit is just beginning." She pushed through the doors and stepped out into the night. The cameras flashed, 100 artificial suns rising at once, but for the first time in her life, Maya didn't want to hide. She walked down the steps, leaving the wreckage of the woman who had tried to destroy her behind in the dark. As she reached the sidewalk, her phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. She answered it, her pulse quickening as a voice she hadn't heard in years spoke a single sentence that changed everything. "You did well tonight, Maya, but you've only seen the surface of what she was hiding." 6 months had passed since the night the Thorne Plaza sign went dark, its neon letters flickering out like the dying gasps of an empire built on sand. The air in the library of the Thorne estate no longer smelled of Beatrice's cloying, expensive lilies. Instead, it carried the honest scent of old paper, beeswax, and the crisp October rain drumming a steady, rhythmic beat against the leaded glass windows. Maya sat behind her father's mahogany desk, the very seat she had once been forbidden to even approach. The leather was cool against her palms, a tactile reminder that the world had stopped shaking beneath her feet. She looked down at the legal folder Julian Halloway had placed before her. It was thin, the finality of a life reduced to a few stapled pages. "The liquidation is complete," Julian said, his voice quiet in the vast, silent room. He stood by the fireplace, the orange glow catching the sharp line of his suit. "The offshore accounts have been emptied, the creditors satisfied, and the remaining Thorne assets have been consolidated under your name. It's over, Maya." She traced the embossed seal on the folder. "And her." "She moved into the apartment on 4th Street yesterday," Julian replied. "It's a far cry from the penthouse. No doorman, no marble, just 60 square feet of linoleum and a view of a brick wall." Maya felt a strange, hollow throb in her chest. It wasn't pity. She had buried that emotion under the weight of Beatrice's betrayals, but it was a heavy realization of the cost of justice. She stood and walked to the window, watching the rain wash over the manicured gardens. 6 months ago, she was a ghost in her own home. Now, she owned the land, the house, and the legacy Beatrice had tried to steal. A soft knock at the door preceded Elia's Vance. The old man looked weary, his shoulders stooped by the secrets he had carried for 20 years. He held a small wooden box, his fingers trembling slightly as he set it on the desk. "I thought you should have this," Elias said, his voice thick with the gravity of the moment. "I took it from the safe before the police arrived that night. I didn't want the state to take the only thing your father had left that was truly his." Maya opened the box. Resting on a bed of faded velvet was her father's signet ring. She picked it up, the gold heavy and cold in her hand. It was the physical weight of a ghost. "Thank you, Elias," she whispered. "There's someone else here," Elias added, stepping aside. Aunt Patricia stood in the doorway. She looked older, the vibrant socialite mask having crumbled to reveal a woman haunted by her own silence. She didn't step into the room. She hovered on the threshold, her hands clutching a modest handbag. "Maya," Patricia began, her voice cracking. I wanted to see if you were all right. I know I stayed silent. I know I watched her treat you like a servant while she spent your inheritance. I thought I was protecting the family name." Maya looked at her aunt, seeing the witness validation she had once craved. But the satisfaction was bitter. Patricia wasn't here out of love. She was here because Maya held the keys to the kingdom now. The power inversion was absolute. "The family name was a lie, Patricia," Maya said, her voice steady and devoid of the rage that had fueled her for months. "You didn't protect the name. You protected the lifestyle. And in doing so, you lost the only person who actually shared your blood." Patricia flinched as if Maya had struck her. She opened her mouth to argue, to offer a justification, but the cold finality in Maya's eyes silenced her. There would be no reunion, no easy forgiveness. The cost of Patricia's comfort had been Maya's childhood, and that was a debt no apology could settle. "I won't be inviting you back," Maya added, turning back to the window. "Julian will ensure your stipend continues, but the estate is closed to you." As Patricia retreated, her heels clicking hollowly down the hallway, Maya felt the final chord of her old life snap. She turned to Julian and Elias. "I have to see her," Maya said. "One last time." The drive to the Lower East Side was a descent into a world Beatrice Thorne had spent a lifetime pretending didn't exist. The streets were narrow, the air thick with the smell of exhaust and cheap frying oil. Maya stepped out of the car, her tailored wool coat a sharp contrast to the gray, crumbling facade of the tenement building. She found Beatrice in a cramped kitchen that smelled of damp and desperation. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms was hunched over a formica table, staring at a flickering television. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thin and dull. She wore a stained cardigan, her fingers fumbling with a generic brand of tea. When Beatrice looked up, her eyes didn't flare with the old fire. They were wide, sunken, and filled with a frantic, animal terror. She looked at Maya's coat, her jewelry, and her posture. The regret porn was visceral. Beatrice's mouth worked, but no sound came out. She was a hollowed-out shell of the predator she had once been. "I brought you this," Maya said, placing a small envelope on the table. "It's the deed to the family plot, for when the time comes." "I didn't want you to think I'd forgotten where you belong." Beatrice's hand shook as she reached for the envelope. She looked at Maya, her lips trembling. You think you've won." "I haven't won, Beatrice," Maya said, leaning down so their faces were inches apart. The scent of cheap soap clung to her aunt. "I just survived you, and now I'm going to forget you." Maya turned and walked out, leaving the woman alone in the silence of her new, small reality. As she stepped back into the rain, Maya looked up at the gray sky. She had her father's ring, her father's house, and her father's name. But the girl who had lived in the shadows was gone, replaced by a woman who knew exactly what it cost to be a thorn. She climbed into the back of the car, her phone buzzing in her pocket. It was a message from Julian. "The rebranding is complete. The new signs go up at dawn." Maya closed her eyes. The war was over, the karma had been delivered, and for the first time in 20 years, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.